Okay, hi, good afternoon, everybody. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Chana Silver, and I hail from Memphis, Tennessee. I teach in a bunch of places here in Israel and do a lot of outreach here as well. And I also have been involved in doing bunches of things in the States, going on a speaking tour in the summer, and I speak in a number of places, from very religious women to everything in between, down to people who are not yet religious, etc. And I'm involved in running trips to Poland. This year will actually be my 13th time going to Poland, which is really very exciting, and I'm all about that trip. Anyway, that's just a couple of things that I do. And so I'm here today to speak to you. We're going to talk about some of the women's side of things in terms of some foundational ideas, ultimately leading to the concept. We're going to speak today about the mitzvah of lighting candles, hadlakas neros, but I want to give some foundational ideas in terms of women in general. And it's a very special thing, because ultimately we're going to end up talking about the other two very special women's mitzvos, which is the concept of taking Challah and also the concept of family purity. And it happens to be that the essence of these mitzvos really are the essence of who we are as women. There's a lot of different things that obviously we're involved in as Jewish women, but the bottom line is there's really, these three mitzvos specifically encapsulate very much the concept and many elements of really who we are. I want to start out with the idea in terms of women. As we know, there are three types of knowledge, and so it's Chachma, Binah, and Das. And so just to go into those for just a moment, so Chachma is really, it's a general search for knowledge. In other words, men and women have this equally, and Chachma, the Maharal tells us, is really a word jumble. It introduces the concept of koach ma. What is it? In other words, whenever we have this innate search for learning and trying to understand something, so it's the concept of Chachma. What? I want to understand all about it. And so men and women have this equally. That's the innate search for learning. The second concept is Da'as, is Binah. That's what we're going to go into in terms of women. Da'as, for the moment, I'll just talk about it briefly. So Da'as is more the idea of cold, calculated facts and details. And as Chachma asks the question, like what? So Da'as asks the question, what kind, how many? It's very specific. It's puzzle pieces. Things have to be problem solved. And we have this koach as well, obviously, with Da'as. But that's not our prevalent concept. The prevalent concept that we have is the concept of Binah, which probably many of you know elements about. I'm just going to talk about it for a few moments. And so we have an extra helping of Binah. There's a medrash that comes from Bereshis and Genesis, and it tells us that, it says, Vayiven Hashem Elokim es hatzela, that God built up this tzela, whatever this tzela was. Some people say a rib, some people say a side. And so the idea about this tzela is that in the Medrash, it speaks about the concept that Hashem gave us an extra helping of Binah. And so what is Binah? So Binah is lots of things. And the truth is this whole topic in terms of women and our kochos, all of our strengths and who we are and what we stand for, it's huge. And we could really talk for a very long time, many classes all about it. I'm trying to just, again, encapsulate it into some very key issues. So the idea of Binah, the secular world, the Western world, tells us that it's women's intuition. We've all heard about that idea, women's intuition. And the truth is, they're getting it from us. It's true. It is about the idea of women's intuition, but it's much, much more. In other words, the secular world, the Western world, they sell us short, because Binah is many more things. Some of the sources talk about the idea that Binah is the idea of maven davar mitoch davar, that to translate that, to learn one thing from another. In our modern day terms, it's the idea of deductive reasoning, to deduce, is that I see something in front of me and I deduce things that are connected to it, that came before it and came after it. Binah connects the dots. As we say that Binah, it's the same word, is bonet. In other words, Binah means many things, but in other words, the idea is that we build, to bonet, to build one thing to the next, one fact to the next, till we can actually connect the dots. And so Binah is about connections. Binah is connected to emotions. Binah is connected to nurturing. Binah is connected to giving. And so it's so again, this whole concept in terms of who we are as women. So this is very much what we're all about. A lot of these ideas we have, these feelings, these strengths we have within us, and it's important to understand what Binah is so we can bring it out and we can make it bigger. And so what we're ultimately going to see is that these three main mitzvos of women actually very much involve the concept of Binah. And so we're going to be talking about that. I have to just share a very quick story with you, which is just very, very funny. And so a lot of times in Kirov, so if I'm teaching classes, teaching a mixed class of college kids or whatever it is, and I'm discussing these ideas in terms of men and women and men's role, women's role, all these different things. So talking about the idea that we are the very much element of Binah, and that men are very much this da'as, cold, calculated puzzle pieces, got to problem solve, all these kind of things. So I'll be talking to the group, and I'll say, okay, here's a scenario. You see a girl crying hysterically. Okay, girls, be quiet for just a moment. Guys, what's your reaction? And so the guys say, stop her from crying. Like, just stop her. We don't want to see her crying. Just stop her, right? Problem solve it. Just stop her. I'm like, perfect, perfect. Okay, guys, be quiet. Girls, what's your reaction? Why is she crying? What just happened, right? And it's just amazing. In other words, that's really how it is. We want to get into the inside of it so we can understand what preceded it so that we can connect it and help her. And it's just it's really fascinating. I've done this a number of times, and like this is really always the reaction. It's just unbelievable. We think differently in terms of men and women. And so that's a fascinating thing. In other words, Binah we can enter a person's reality from the inside. We're very good at building people, we're very good at building relationships, and then again, this is going to tie into a lot of the ideas that we're going to speak about, and so that's one prelude to the three mitzvos. And another prelude is in the Deeper Hashkafa, the Maharal talks about the idea that, first of all, start off with the world. So the world, he says, was created, Rashi actually, in Bereshit says that the world was created with the letter Hey. And that Olam Haba, the next world, the world to come, the world we came from, the world we're going to, the spiritual world was created with the letter Yud. And so the larger concept, before we introduce that back into women, so the larger concept is that that the letter Hey is really a combination of two letters. It's the letter Dalet and the letter Yud. In other words, when we write it in the Torah, that's actually how it looks. It's specifically a Dalet. Is it this way? This way? Dalet? And I always get mixed up when you're facing me. This way? This way. Anyway, Dalet. Okay, whatever it is. Anyway, and the letter Yud. So the letter Dalet, Maharal tells us, is the concept of the physical world. In other words, spreading out in the material world. Because if they're two straight lines, and so if the horizontal line would spread out, it would continue to go out into oblivion, and the vertical line would continue to go out in oblivion. And the concept of physical things are tangible. Physical things take up space. So the letter Dalet, if it would spread out, it would take up a lot of space. So it represents the world of the physical. The letter Yud represents the world of the spiritual. It's actually interesting because it's the smallest letter of the Aleph Beis. In other words, it takes up the least physical space, which is fascinating. And aside from in the letter Hey, the letter Yud is always written at the top of the line. It's always reaching up to the higher spiritual realms, which is fascinating. The letter Yud also represents not only spiritual, but the concept of the world of the future, the world of creativity, the world of thought, the world of ideas. In other words, these things exist, but they're not tangible yet. They haven't happened. In other words, if you could just picture, let's say the concept of the word oseh, right? He is doing. You put a Yud in the front of it, he will do, right? He hasn't done it yet. He's thinking about doing it. It doesn't exist yet. In other words, it's still in the realm of the future. It's not tangible. So the letter Dalet is very tangible, very physical in the world of this, like the reality as we know it. The letter Yud is spiritual, but it's also the world of the future. Okay, so that makes sense in terms of this world in general, before we go back into the concept of women, is that the idea is that this world, of course, is created with the letter Hey. Because at what we know as thinking Jews is that we live very much in the world of Dalet. It's physical reality. We have physical bodies, physical chairs, physical everything. And yet, a Jew understands, and what we try to go for, is that there's a duality. In other words, a Jew wants to live in the physical world and then reach for the spiritual. It's very interesting in a lot of the work that I do with Kiruv and things. So it's funny. It's a funny kind of idea, but you get asked certain questions about specific things that I find often are the questions. It's a fascinating thing. So many times people will ask me, again, people who are not yet religious, and they'll say, they'll ask if you could just somehow put into one sentence the concept of what does it mean to be a Jew, right? What is that? Which is hard. That's a hard thing to do because, it's just our whole life, right? It's everything, life and breath reality for us. But I think I've come up with an answer which is actually connected to what we're saying, is that what we do in Judaism is that we take the physical and we use it to access the spiritual. I think that actually does encapsulate really everything. We take the physical and we use it to access the spiritual. In other words, we take a very expensive, beautiful, sterling silver Kiddush cup and we put very physical wine that comes from grapes grown from the ground, all very physical reality. And then we make Kiddush, we make a bracha. We're at a bris, a circumcision, and it's holy. We're drinking the 4 cups at Pesach, on Passover, right? In other words, it's just everything. We take that physical and we use it to access the spiritual. That's really the concept of all the commandments. That's really everything that we're doing. If you'll think about it as you go through your day, you are using physical things and you're accessing the spiritual by actually tapping into the physical. Same thing, let's say, with an apple, is that I'm very hungry and I want to feed my physical body, and I'm going to eat my physical apple, and I make a bracha, I make a blessing, and I bring the whole thing just absolutely right up. And I've just created a piece of eternity by that one blessing. And so that's really what it's all about. And so that's the concept. So of course the world was created with the letter Hey. That makes perfect sense. We utilize the world and we utilize it to actually access the spiritual. Unlike, let's say, some of the Eastern religions where they have to push away all the physical and they have to sit, on top of Mount Nanga Parbat, and they have to be in a lotus position and they have to push away the physical so the spiritual can come in. No. We literally utilize the physical with the spiritual, and that's how we tap into eternity. And it's really awesome. And again, these mitzvos are soon going to connect to this idea. Okay, so, but that's the world at large, and that's us Jews at large. And I'll even venture to say that that's us as human beings at large, men and women together. We are, of course, a mixture of Hey, because we have a very physical goof, it's the Dalet, and we have very much a piece of God, that's our soul, that's something totally spiritual and eternal, that's our batteries. That really makes us tick, so to speak. And so all human beings are definitely a microcosm of this concept of the letter Hey. But we as women in particular are very much this element. And that's very much the idea that in the deeper Hashkafa, it talks very, very many times about the idea that women are the letter Hey and men are the letter Yud. And so I want to focus on the element of the Hey-ness for us. And it's fascinating. In other words, as women, so we are terrific letter Heys. How does that work? So our larger letter is a Dalet, right? So that's actually very large, right? And so that's the world of the physical. And so we're really, really good at it. I'll tell you, it's interesting. So, sometimes we're at like a wedding, right? So I peek on the other side occasionally here and there, on the men's side, right? And so what do you see? What do you see? Well, you see a lot of black, a lot of white. Okay, sometimes a little manifestation in the tie and the socks, a little bit with men, just a little bit. Anyway, so then you turn around, right, to the women's side. And so first I'll just tell you the joke. And what do you see? Well, you see a lot of black. Okay, now the joke's over. Anyway, that was mildly funny, come on. Anyway, but then what happens is you see colors, style, makeup, jewelry, hair, fabric, shoes, nails, right? Everything going on. So we are so good at manifesting in the world of Dalet. We're actually really good at it. Why is it that we as women, well, like we're doing our house, we're doing our apartment, like why does the cabinets have to match the couch, have to match the carpet, right? And exactly that little piece of tiling in the bathroom, it's got to match everything. Why? Because we're really good at the world of Dalet, right? But the trick of a woman, and again, we could speak about this any way that you can talk about anything to do with women in Judaism, it's always going to go back to this letter, the concept of this letter Hey. And so the idea is that we're supposed to manifest. We have something to express in the world. We're very, very good at it in terms of making things real, making things tangible, and really carrying things out in the physical world. But the trick of a woman, the secret of a woman, is to always keep connected to that Yud. That's in our letter too, right? The letter is really there. The letter Yud is really there. And so let's say, let me go back to my example. So if yes, I do want everything in my home to match and to be just so, and I'm so good at it, right, as the letter Dalet, and that's wonderful, but let me attach it to the letter Yud. And so what does that mean? So in other words, if I want to have a nice home because I want to impress or rather make jealous the Jones or the Schwartzes, so then that's Dalet for Dalet. That's Dalet. That's not good at all. But if I want to have a beautiful home so that I can have wonderful company at Shabbos and make them feel comfortable and have guests in my home and have a beautiful guest room and have Torah classes in my home and have different simchas in my home, well, that's daled for yud. That's daled for yud. So every manifestation of a woman is always going to involve this letter, which is interesting for us to think about even long after the class. Like, okay, I'm great at the daled. How can I make it connect to the yud? This is true for the concept of all elements of tznius, all elements of really our rule, as we're going to see. And so this is a little bit the foundational idea of what we have to bring out in terms of the letter Hey and the letter Yud, and the fact that we are very much this manifestation of the letter Hey. And it's important to understand, again, deeply hashkafically, where we're coming from with this particular idea. Okay, so that sets the tone a little bit for the ideas that we talked about, the idea of Binah and the idea of the fact that we are Hays. Okay, now, so that's the foundation. So I want to talk today about the concept of the mitzvah of Neiros. In other words, we are given over the special mitzvah to light Neiros on Shabbos. And first of all, I really just need to back up for 1 second. There's a medrash. There's many different sources, but the medrash that I'm thinking about right now comes from Medrash Rabbah in Parshas Chayei Sarah. And it's talking about when Sarah Imenu died. And it's a very famous medrash. It's talking about the idea that when Sarah died, so when Sarah was alive, so there was an anan that was over her tent, a cloud that was over her tent, and when she died, it went away, but when Rivka married Yitzchak, it came back on the scene. And that when Sarah was alive, all the years she was alive, so there was a blessing in her dough, and her dough of her challah actually stayed fresh all week. Okay, we'll get into that next class. We'll talk about that, what that means. And then when she died, that blessing was gone. And when Rivka Imenu comes on the scene to marry Yitzchak, so then the blessing comes back. And then the third thing, which of course is famous, is that when Sarah Imenu lit her candles, Erev Shabbos, they actually stayed lit the entire Erev Shabbos, the entire week, through Erev Shabbos through the next Erev Shabbos. That was obviously a total miracle, and so when she died, that went away, and when Rivka Imenu came on the scene, so then it happened for her as well. And so the idea, what's the idea? In other words, this medrash is nice, it's interesting, something perhaps we've heard of, but what really do these things mean? So first and foremost, we're going to talk about Neiros, we said. So the idea with Sarah is that her candle stayed lit the entire week. Now, interesting, one of the many ideas about Shabbos, one of the many ideas, is the concept, and something, again, so much for us to think about, is that really part of the idea of Shabbos, it's a touch with Olam Haba, it's a touch with things that are eternal, it's a cessation of work, as we know, and it's the idea that the 25 hours of Shabbos that we live through, we're supposed to glean so much from spiritually as we go through the moments of that Shabbos, and we're actually supposed to live the next week on a higher realm. We're supposed to live, like we have to take those spiritual sparks, so to speak, and we're supposed to turn it into living life on a higher realm the next week. And so the fact that Sarah had this incredible miracle that happened for her, this total nace, that her candle stayed lit all week, this is a physical representation of the fact that she did this. In other words, all 127 years of her life, when she was lighting those Shabbos candles, she literally lived her life on such a high level that the 25 hours of Shabbos she got very much from, and the very next week she lived on a higher realm. And then after the next Shabbos, the very next week she lived on a higher realm. And so there was actually this physical representation of really what her spirituality was. So Sarah was obviously an excellent Hey. She was doing this very, very well. And so that's actually what the miracle itself means. The concept of the Neiros is really fascinating. It's talking about the idea of the sanctity of time. The sanctity of time. And so we as women, we have a tremendous handle on that. And it's interesting. It's an interesting thing. There's a duality. One is the sanctity of time. Something is something else in a few moments I'll talk about. Fascinating and interesting. Yeah.
Sorry, you were saying, I just want to make sure I understood. You were saying that because Sarah lived Shabbos and the next week at a higher realm because of that experience of Shabbos, so the Neiros staying lit from week to week were a representation of her spirituality.
Right, exactly. Her spiritual height. In other words, that she really did what...
Because she took from those Neiros that Shabbos, so to speak, and lived it and then brought herself to a new place. So those Neiros stayed lit in connection to her staying lit, so to speak.
Right, exactly. But it wasn't only the Neiros. In other words, the Neiros cap off or start off the concept of Shabbos. Then she got everything she possibly could spiritually out of that Shabbos. and then took that into the week. So it's the lighting of the candles start the ball rolling, so to speak, and then the rest of the hours of Shabbos continued that, and then she continued that into her week. It spread into her week. It's interesting. I'm happy that you stopped me because it made me think of one other thing I wanted to say, so thank you. It's interesting. So in other words, obviously Shabbos, we have to try to figure out, how to get more out of, and the reality of what Shabbos really is, and again, very, very large topic. But fascinatingly enough, so the Shulchan Aruch and ultimately the Mishnah Berurah bring two ideas that very much help us. In other words, actually talking about post-Shabbos. And so one is the concept of Melava Malka. As we know, we consider it really the fourth meal of Shabbos. It's something that should not be laid by the wayside. It's really important. It's also the meal of Tchias HaMesim, resurrection of the dead. There's a lot of deep things with it. And so, my goodness, Hashem's asking us to eat. It's not so difficult, So, if you can fulfill it by the way of l'cha'achila, to actually be able to wash and have some bread. There's other halachos involved, but b'diavad, technically you could do it by either making a mazonos or a ha'etz. Most people don't realize about the ha'etz. And you should always have in mind that while you're eating this thing, you're having your Melava Malka, and it's huge, it's deep, it's eternal, it's big time. And also the Noam Elimelech, again, you came actually on the Poland trip, the Noam Elimelech actually shares with us that, very pertinent to us as women, is that if you're makbid with Melava Malka, so it's a skula for an easier labor and childbirth. So that's pretty interesting. Yeah. And but that, in other words, the idea is that the three important meals of Shabbos, and then you're taking that, you're spilling it over into the week, Melava Malka. The other thing that actually the Mishnah Berurah brings down, the Chavetz Chaim, which maybe not everyone knows, and that's the concept of lighting Motzei Shabbos candles. And it's very special. My particular family, we have a minhag that we take from the Havdalah candle, which is the thing that separates, the Kodesh from the Chol, and actually bringing that into the week. And with the Havdalah candle itself, we light 2 candles, Motzei Shabbos. There's no bracha, there's no nothing. And I find it's very special when I'm home on Motzei Shabbos, I like to do my work or whatever it is, near those candles. I feel like it's very holy, because again, that's a reminder for us to actually take that and let it spill into our week from Shabbos. Okay, so that's just 2 interesting things. So let's go back. So the sanctity of time, that's the idea of the candles. So one of the ideas. So very, very interesting. I don't know, I'll speak for myself, but you know how you have, how I have Friday is just really crazy, hectic, and then some. And now it's off the charts. I'm saying Shabbos starting at 4 o'clock. I don't know. It's just unbelievable. But even in the summer when Shabbos starts much later, there just never seems to be enough time. I don't know. There's just so many details. It's all filled with so many details. And the house is flying, and things are just really rolling. And then you go and you're really ready and you light those Shabbos candles and it changes. The whole feel of the home changes. It's unbelievable. Have you guys tapped into this? You feel this? It's uncanny. It's actually otherworldly and it's spiritual. Sanctity of time. We as women usher that in. It starts with the lighting of the candles. And it's just so strange because really a minute before, everything was so hectic, so stressful, and you could feel it's tangible. It's actually something that's tangible. And so this is an amazing thing. We are very much involved in that world of Dalit, and it's Erev Shabbos, and we are just rolling with one thing to the next to get ready for the Holy Shabbos. And then with the lighting of the candles, it flips into the Yud. And so it's unbelievable. I just want to read you. I have to talk about one thing very quickly. It's so funny. There was some article that I read a while back in one of these Jewish magazines, and I really think it was a fictitious article. I mean, it had to be, because it was this woman, and she had a bunch of little children, and she was talking about how she was hyper organized, and everything was just so. And then all the little kids who went to school, everything was ready when they came back from school on Friday, and she gave them an Erev Shabbos snack, and then she bathed them, and she put them to bed, and everything was fine. And then she gave them, a Erev Shabbos treat when they woke up, and everything was picture perfect. And then she was able to sit down and say her Tehillim before. You're cringing, right? Right. Everybody that read this article just really, they were nauseous. I really have to tell you, they were so nauseous. And I'm this has to be fictitious. It doesn't make sense that this thing is really true. It would be nice. And if we could be that way, that's amazing. And of course, if we can try to plan for it, and when life is less hectic, certainly it's a wonderful thing, obviously. But many times that's actually not how it is for us. And so I like to be very real. I'm very real, very down to earth. And so, and still and all, we change the Zman. In other words, when we light those candles, we change. We really have we can cap it at the top, the concept of the sanctity of time. Just going to share with you for a moment a little excerpt from a very interesting book. It's a book called Playing with Fire, and it's from Tova Mordechai. She now lives in Tzfat, and she has a whole interesting history. She was born in England, and she was a Pentecostal Protestant, and it's a whole very fascinating book, and she really is searching for spirituality on a lot of levels, and she doesn't find it in Christianity, and it happens to be actually that her mother is Jewish, but she didn't realize that this made a whole difference because her father was a Pentecostal Protestant, but she didn't realize because the Pentecostals go by patrilineal descent, and she did not realize that, really honestly, she was a Jew, and so it just wasn't doing it for her soul, all this Christian stuff. And so eventually, it's a whole long story, but eventually she gets out of this Christian college in England where she was studying to be like a preacher and a minister, and she ends up in a Chabad house, or Shabbos. She's in her mid-20s. And so it's interesting, the Pentecostals did change their holy day from Sunday to Saturday. They take on Jewish names. It's interesting. So she knew a semblance of Shabbos, but she didn't, and they had Sabbath, right, on Saturday, but she didn't really know what it was with all the halachos and all the different things. Anyway, she ends up in this Chabad house, and she doesn't know how to keep Shabbos. She doesn't know anything. It's her first time. And so they're puttering around the kitchen. Everything's a mess, and she's trying to help this mother of many, many children, and like everything's just a freaking mess there. And then all of a sudden, the mother says, okay, it's time to light Shabbos candles. And so she just can't believe it because, everything's just a mess, and like they're just quickly trying to clean up the last few things. And then they go into this dining room, and like that room was unbelievable. The table was set, and everything was gleaming, and the candlesticks. And of course, it's a Chabad home, so all the kids are lighting candles, and she doesn't understand any of this. And she is just feeling this turmoil inside because everything was so crazy. And they kept asking her, do you want to take a shower? Do you want to take a shower now? And she says no, because she was thinking she'll be able to take a shower and relax after Shabbos starts, after the Sabbath starts. Like that's what they did when she was in the Christian college. She didn't know anything. And so it was just very, very wild. And so she's just angry, and she doesn't want to light the candle. They're telling her to light the candle, but she says, you know what, I'm going to light that candle after all. And then I'm just going to go up and I'm going to take a shower. And so this is like all what preceded this. Anyway, very, very interesting. So I'm just going to read for just a couple of paragraphs. So she lights this candle, and she says the children help her say these meaningless words. In Hebrew, she doesn't know what she's saying. And then the mother says to her gently, she says, good Shabbos, and she kissed me on the cheek. I smiled gently, and she says, so little ceremony, so little intensity. The Jews did nothing more than light a candle, and they had Shabbos. Very odd. This was so not what she was used to. Well, finally, Shabbos has arrived. I'm going to go take a shower now, if that's all right. Sandy, the mother, looked at me open-mouthed. She says, I'm sorry, but I thought you understood. Why? We don't do that on Shabbos. That's why I kept asking you if you want to take a shower. Well, I was devastated. Why hadn't somebody told me? I couldn't believe it. I was filthy. Sandy had encouraged me during the week to let my hair down, as it was customary for single girls in this community to wear buns on the top of their heads, and I had done so. But my hair was extremely long, for strict Christian women never had their hair cut, and now it dangled down around me in limp strands. I was not going to walk out of the house now for the next 25 hours. I stomped up the stairs, grumbling to myself that I was going to take a shower anyway. It wasn't my fault. They should have explained it. If they thought I was going to set foot out, they had another thing coming. Oh, I was so angry. And so then she says, unbelievable. She stood at the top of the steps, and inside she was in such turmoil. She says, I just can't, I screamed. This is awful, oh God, and my eyes filled with tears. And as I opened the door, I stood back, somewhat startled. I just couldn't go in the room. Something was in the room. Peace. The peace was filling this whole room. It was so thick you could touch it. I stood still for a moment, and then I noticed that the whole house was filled with this peace. I remained motionless on the landing for a while, allowing the storm inside to calm. God was in this home. In 25 years, I had never sensed his presence so strongly. And I only lit a candle, I whispered to myself. I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that God was really with these people, these religious Jews. They didn't need quiet meditation. They didn't need to unwind and enter the Sabbath spirit. She's describing all things that went on in this Christian college. It was as if they were saying, we don't have to leave this world or change spheres. We can have God right here. They could be hectically busy right up until the last minute, and then all they had to do was light a candle, and suddenly the whole house was transformed into a blissful haven of rest. I sensed instinctively that there was more spirituality in their simple action than in trying desperately to contact God through fasting and prostration, because he had been there all along. That is totally the concept of Judaism. That's everything we just said with the idea of the hay. She said, well, I was absolutely astounded. I didn't want to wash my hair anymore. I didn't want to take a shower. I would go to the synagogue just as I was. It really didn't seem to matter anymore. I felt God was embracing me in that room, and I didn't want to let go of his clutches or do anything at all that would disturb this peace. I also felt that I would do anything I had to do to find this God of the Jews. It's a beautiful, beautiful piece, and I really feel that that is very much the idea. So one concept that we spoke about so far, there is a PS, not a PS, but there's a second idea about the concept of neighbors, which we're going to have to cover another time because we're a little shorter in time, and I know people have to go. But the idea, again, we talked about the concept of the Binah, which we're going to tie in with the next idea of Neiros that I'm going to talk about next time. And we also spoke about the idea of the hay. And so we as women, we take the whole physical, we're involved so much with all the details of the world of Daled, and then we connect it to that Yud, and through the literal lighting of our candles, we literally transform the Zman, the time, from Chol, from regular weekday, to Kodesh, to something holy. And it's something actually tangible that we can tap into. So think about it this next week as you are hectically getting ready, because you know what? It's going to come very soon. We're just finished with it right this minute, but boy, it's going to come very shortly. Again, can't stop time, and much more to be continued. Thank you so much for coming, everyone.